What's up, my fellow fight fans? We had some very important fights announced recently. I'm going to go over those and give my first impressions. Also, I'll be going over UFC Fight Night Abu Dhabi, Saturday, July 26th. I'm going to go over that whole card and give my predictions for those fights. Welcome to Teflon Combat Sports and Fitness. I'm Teflon Sean. Let's get right into some of these fights that were announced. The main event for UFC 320 is going to be Ankalaev versus Pereira 2. This is a fight we all knew was coming. The first fight was pretty close. Wasn't exactly a banger by any means, but it was a close fight. Really could have went either way. I expect this one to be similar. It is difficult to pick because Pereira does fight much different when there's a threat of a takedown. He was very successful in stopping the takedowns last time. He even had the only takedown of the whole fight. However, you can tell it greatly affected his offense. I do expect him to come out more aggressive. However, this aggression may lead to him being open for takedowns. On the other hand, that aggression may lead to a knockout of Ankalaev. My first impression is that Ankalaev wins another boring decision. I hope I'm wrong, but that's my first impression. Like I said, I may change it. The co-main event for UFC 320 is going to be Merab Dvalishvili versus Corey Sandhagen. I'm going to pick Merab. I think that Sandhagen has moments. You know, he could catch Merab coming in, but I don't think he has the power to stop him in those moments, and he might look good early on. If we remember back to Sandhagen's fight with Nurmagomedov, he was a lot more conservative with his striking, because he was so concerned about the takedowns of Nurmagomedov. I expect that to be similar this time, although I do think he will be a little more aggressive in that area. I think he will be very preoccupied with the grappling ability of Merab. That will allow Merab to be more competitive in the striking. So I look for Merab to win. The first 2 rounds may be competitive, but I feel like just like in the Nurmagomedov fight, I don't think Sandhagen gassed out. But he did slow down. Merab will not slow down. So I expect him to grind out a 5-round decision there. The third fight that was announced for UFC 320 is a banger. Yuri Prochazka versus Khalil Roundtree Jr. I've wanted to see this fight for a while. These are obviously 2 of the top 205ers in the division. They've both lost to Pereira. However, I wouldn't mind seeing either of these guys versus Ankalaev. My first impression, I'm going to have to go with Yuri Prochazka, especially if he continues the evolution we saw in his last fight versus Jamal Hill. That was a new and improved Prochazka with the head movement, the counters, and I think if he can fight the same way against Khalil Roundtree, he probably wins by 3rd or 4th round stoppage. All right, moving on to UFC 321. Bunch of fights just got announced on this card. It looks like it's going to be a very good card. The heavyweight division is finally getting some movement. We're going to have Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane. Pretty good fight. I expect that Cyril Gane has been working on his grappling since that horrific showing against Jones a few years ago. I'm going to take Tom Aspinall by 2nd or 3rd round stoppage. I just think he has more options. I think he's better than Gane everywhere. I think he hits harder. I think he's faster. Also, you know, Gane hasn't been very active. He's been making movies or whatever he's been doing. His attention's been divided. Meantime, Tom Aspinall's just been trying to fight. He's been training. Obviously, I think that means a lot. But these are 2 big, athletic guys. There's not a lot of heavyweights out there that can do what these guys can do. They can both move really well. I think Aspinall has better footwork. I think he's faster in that way. So I just don't see a scenario where Cyril Gane wins that fight. I just really don't. I think he's a good fighter. I think the Jones fight made him look bad. He's probably better at grappling now than he was then. But I just don't see how he could beat Tom Aspinall right now. I just don't. So moving on to the co-main event of UFC 321, we're going to have Volkov versus Almeida. A lot of people hate on Almeida after the Curtis Blaydes fight. And admittedly, that was kind of an embarrassing knockout. However, did we all forget what he was doing to Curtis Blaydes before that happened? We've never seen anybody manhandle Curtis Blaydes like that. Jailton Almeida is a serious threat in the grappling department, unless he makes a serious mistake like he did in that Curtis Blaydes fight. I just don't see Volkov being able to hold off his grapple. I just don't. Volkov does not have real one-punch knockout power, and his grappling is nowhere near the pedigree of Jailton Almeida. So I think Almeida wins that fight. Maybe he stops Volkov in the later rounds by submission or ground and pound. But I do think Almeida wins that fight. And then I think that leads to a very interesting fight, Jailton Almeida versus Tom Aspinall. Moving on to the third fight announced for UFC 321, we have Rakic versus Mirzakhanov. I'm going to go with Mirzakhanov on that one, but I might change that by the time the fight comes around. The fourth fight announced for UFC 321 is Aliskarov versus Park. I think I'm going to go with Aliskarov in that fight. And then the fourth fight announced is Maxim versus Raposo. Raposo, of course, from probably the worst season of the Ultimate Fighter that there's ever been, especially in terms of the talent that was on the show. I think Maxim wins that fight pretty easily. All right, so now I'm going to move on to my predictions for UFC Fight Night Abu Dhabi, Saturday, July 26th, 2025. The first fight up is going to be Marcus Buchecha versus Boudet. Now they're bringing Buchecha over here to add some depth to heavyweight, but don't get too excited about it. I guess Marcus Buchecha is a talented jiu-jitsu guy. However, his striking is terrible. His conditioning is terrible. Watch Marcus Buchecha versus Omar Khan in one championship, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about the guy. His striking isn't going to be very much improved from then. I doubt his conditioning is going to be much different. I think he'll get past Boudet. So I'm going to pick Buchecha. However, as far as him being a great addition to the UFC heavyweight roster, I don't think he is that. The next fight I picked is Yahya versus Win. I'm going to go with Win in this fight. Moving on to Aslan versus Alakana. I'm going to go with Alakana in this fight. A lot of these I'm just gonna speed right through because I'm going to spend more time on the main event. So moving on to Davy Grant versus Blackshear. I love watching Davy Grant fight. I think he's a lot of fun, but I think his better days are behind him. So I do think Damon Blackshear wins this fight. Okay, moving on to Salikov versus Liao. I'm going to go with Liao. Okay, moving on to Bryce Mitchell versus Said Nurmagomedov. I'm going to go with Bryce Mitchell. I think he has been in with better competition. I think he's done pretty good with that competition, even though he's lost to the more elite guys he's fought. He's even given them some of the most resistance that they've experienced in their career so far. So I'm going to go with Bryce Mitchell to beat Said Nurmagomedov. Moving on to Krylov versus Guskev. This is another one that was a little difficult to pick, and I'm almost tempted to change my pick right now, but I am still going to go with Guskev. I think that he'll catch Krylov eventually, and maybe late second round, third round, and he'll beat Krylov. The next fight up is Almabayev versus Ochoa. This is another toss-up, but I'm going to go with Almabayev here. All right, so moving on to Shara Bullet versus Barrios. Both these guys are pretty mid, to be honest with you. Shara has like pretty good kicks, but no boxing, no grappling, and I just don't think he's very good. And Barrios, I think he has more options, and I think he'll win. So I'm going with Barrios. Okay, moving on to my favorite fight of the night. Petr Yan versus Marcus McGee. This is a fun fight. Marcus McGee is an incredible athlete. I think he can stop anybody in this division, but to be honest, this should be a fairly easy fight for Petr Yan. Yan is probably the most underrated fighter in all of the UFC. His skill set is second to none. I feel like Petr Yan's fight IQ, his actual fight experience, the level of competition he's fought, and his ability to adapt to almost anything that his opponent is doing. I feel like these things should make it an easy night for Petr Yan. However, Marcus McGee is very dangerous, and there is a scenario where he catches Yan. However, I feel even if Yan does get hurt at some point, he's able to recover as he has in the past and he pulls it out. So I'm picking Petr Yan to win. Main event time. So we have Robert Whittaker versus Reinier de Ridder, or RDR. This is a tough one to pick because if you've been watching MMA for as long as I have, you remember how good Robert Whittaker is. You remember his fights with Yoel Romero, his close fight with Israel Adesanya. You remember the Darren Till fight. You remember Robert Whittaker in his prime, and he was a very good fighter, and he still looks like that man. He still looks like that fighter. However, he hasn't performed like that fighter for quite some time. I think RDR is very awkward. Whittaker has had problems with awkward fighters. RDR will use his range and grappling ability. I think he wears Whittaker down and eventually stops Whittaker by submission, unfortunately. So that's my pick. I'm going with RDR. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, if you agree, if you disagree. I'm looking forward to these fights. There's some potential bangers on here and some very important fights. But that's all I have for you guys tonight. I thank you for paying attention as long as you did and listening to me. Please give this video a like and subscribe. I have a lot more content coming your way. You guys will definitely hear from me soon. God bless.